The golden light stretched across the narrow pathway, and the backyard glowed under the crisp early autumn night. Amid the rustle of leaves in the wind and the scent of freshly baked bread, a wedding was quietly taking place, not filled with the noise of polite applause or the scrutinizing gazes of distant guests, but with genuine laughter and two hands clasped together in a tender promise. It was not a story of lavish grandeur or invitations printed with elaborate fonts. It was a story of choice. The choice to rise, after being overlooked time and again, the choice of a love that needed no validation from anyone else, and the choice to turn every word of scorn into the softest soundtrack for a dance that would never be forgotten. This is the journey of Elena, who decided that happiness does not lie in the approval of her mother, her sister, or anyone else except her own heart. And when she stepped into this little party of her life, everything changed forever. Elena sat curled up on the old wooden chair on Aunt Nora's porch, the dim glow of the streetlight casting long shadows across the glass window in front of her, reflecting the loneliness she felt inside. The chilly Boston evening air seeped through the thin layers of her sweater, sending a shiver down her spine. The phone in her hand was still warm from the brief but cutting conversation that had pulled her back to a harsh truth. A backyard. That's not a real wedding. That's a garden party for poor people. Her mother's voice, Mrs. Hawkins, was calm, unwavering, and devoid of even a flicker of curiosity or encouragement. Then the call abruptly ended, leaving a thick, suffocating silence in its wake. Elena clutched the phone tightly as if it still held the fading warmth of what should have been a blessing, but all that remained was the sound of wind rustling through the leaves and the thunderous pounding of her heart sinking into a hollow well of disappointment. She wondered if she was too naive to hope for something different. Deep down, Elena already knew her mother would not come, not because she was too busy, or because something unexpected had happened, but because this wedding wasn't grand enough to draw her out, not glamorous enough to parade around as a badge of honor. She closed her eyes, picturing the months of preparation, every recycled glass jar she had carefully washed and strung into lanterns, every bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered from their little garden to line the walkway. It was all her sweat and her faith, not a lavish affair with a guest list stretching endlessly or a chandeliered ballroom. But to her mother that was not enough. In her mother's eyes, a real wedding belonged in a high-end venue with monogrammed napkins, a 7-course feast, and photographs worthy of boasting about at dinner parties. Elena sat there, her bare feet cold on the scuffed wooden floor, her eyes dry with no more tears left to shed. Memories of past conversations flooded her mind, shards of broken glass cutting into a heart already scarred. Her mother had never asked how much she loved Marcus, never wondered why she chose to marry in the very place where they had nurtured their happiness, the backyard where they had spent countless dusks leaning against each other. Her mother only asked, "Will someone be taking photos? Will there be a videographer? Have you booked a band?" To her mother, those questions were all that mattered. The promises and the loving glances were secondary, if they mattered at all. The phone still rested in Elena's hand, its black screen mirroring her weary face. She had waited, hoped that the call would come back, that her mother might change her mind and show up on her daughter's most important day. But deep down, Elena knew that hope was a fantasy. In the quiet, she heard the distant hum of traffic, the sound of Marcus stepping out the door, but she didn't lift her gaze. She didn't want anyone to see the vulnerability in her eyes. The chill slipped through her fingers, but it wasn't as cold as the emptiness growing inside her chest, an emptiness no grand celebration could ever fill, no matter how dazzling the congratulations. All that was left was her, and the unwavering resolve that she would no longer allow anyone, even the woman who had given her life, to strip away the simple, honest happiness she had chosen. Marcus stepped onto the porch carrying 2 steaming cups of tea, his gaze tender and filled with understanding. He didn't ask her anything, just quietly sat beside her, letting the silence between them become a warm blanket against the chill of the Boston afternoon. Elena took the cup, her hands trembling from the cold and the crushing disappointment that surrounded her. She said no. She whispered, her voice splintered like a lake's surface shattered by the wind. Marcus didn't reply, just nodded softly, his eyes reflecting a knowledge that seemed to have been there all along. Because it's in the backyard, Elena let out a small laugh, a laugh that tasted more bitter than sweet. In a breath that carried her sigh, she told Marcus about the words her mother had said, words that cut across her skin, like the edge of a blade, that a real wedding had to happen under crystal chandeliers, with the sounds of classical music and the clink of glasses filled with wine, not amidst wildflowers and strings of lights she had hung by hand. It doesn't match what she pictured, Marcus said slowly, his eyes following the faint glow of lights in the backyard, the little garden Elena had transformed into her own secret haven. She imagined herself in it. He added, his voice like a wave lapping at the shore, gentle yet strong enough to carry away any doubt. Elena fell still because she knew he had touched the truth she had been trying to avoid. Her mother had never asked what she wanted, never asked how much effort she had poured into creating that cozy space. She only asked how the wedding would look to others, whether there would be envy or admiration. She wanted a wedding not to see her daughter happy, but to stand in the crowd and soak up the approving glances of others. Elena felt her heart clench, her hands tightening around the ceramic cup as if trying to find something to hold on to. All the sparkle and grandeur seemed nothing more than a thin mask over a mother's love she had once hoped was real. But now, in Marcus's eyes, she found the only thing worth holding on to: a silent understanding and shared compassion. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the tea seep into her, letting Marcus's words become a soothing balm for old wounds. It was never about you. It never was. And it was true, Elena knew that. But for the first time, she also knew that she no longer had to prove her worth. Her happiness didn't need anyone's approval. It was already full, already real, needing nothing more than the two of them and the little backyard garden they had built together, shining with its own kind of light. Elena let her thoughts drift with the sigh she let out quietly, slipping back into memories like the season's first snowflakes falling slowly before her eyes. She remembered Victoria's wedding, her older sister's day, which should have been a shared joy, but instead turned into an extravagant stage for ambitions to be paraded. Elena, in a simple black dress, was not a part of that wedding. She stood tucked behind the lavish floral arch, a walkie-talkie clipped discreetly to her belt, her ear attuned to the rigid commands of the event coordinators. On the long banquet table covered in white silk, the flickering candles reflected in the expensive crystal glasses, and her mother walked like a queen, her eyes shining with pride as she adjusted the imported, expensive gown on Victoria. Elena still remembered every detail: the cheap shoes hastily bought from a clearance store that made her heels bleed within hours, yet she kept walking without a complaint, quietly doing everything she could to ensure the event was perfect in her mother's eyes. In the photographs taken that day, there was no place for Elena, just a blurred figure in the background wiping the cream off a table stained by the opulent wedding cake, like an anonymous servant in a story that was never hers. That night, as Victoria glided across the dance floor with her groom, to the sweet strains of a violin, Elena stood on the edge, her heart tightening when she heard her mother whisper into her ear, "Your turn will come, my dear." But as the years passed, Elena realized that turn was never meant for her. Her mother had never intended to leave even a sliver of her heart open to welcome the happiness of her younger daughter. Elena did not cry that day, nor in the many years after. She simply swallowed her tears, learning to smile on the sidelines of the grand weddings where she was never the bride, only the quiet shadow running errands. Now, sitting on the old wooden porch of the little house where she and Marcus had built their dream, Elena wondered if those silent sacrifices had ever meant anything in her mother's eyes. The answer was clear. and for the first time she did not feel sadness. Because she knew that true love did not need to be seen by others, did not need the sparkle of crystal chandeliers or hollow praise. It only needed a small garden, a warm hand, and a heart brave enough to believe that happiness does not lie in extravagant parties, but in the eyes of someone who patiently sits beside you through the long, silent nights. Elena sat on the living room floor, the warm yellow light casting a gentle glow over each cream-colored invitation card she had printed herself and tied with delicate silk thread. Each card was a small story, a piece of the dream she and Marcus had spent countless months piecing together. There were no gold-embossed letters or luxurious seals, only carefully written lines, and a faint scent of lavender she had meticulously sprayed onto the paper before folding it. When her mother called and said that a small backyard wedding was shameful, Elena simply smiled and set the phone down. She no longer needed her mother's approval, because she knew this wedding wasn't about impressing people who would never understand the care she put into every detail. It was a ceremony of the heart, a day for her and Marcus alone, wrapped in sincerity, and the memories they had built over the years. She thought of the late afternoons when she and Marcus walked along the river near their home, talking about their dreams of a peaceful home. The times they quietly planned how to decorate the little garden, debating whether to choose wildflowers or roses, then laughing when they realized what really mattered was the way he looked at her, and the way she looked back, not the flowers on the table. They had painted the fence together, tested how the twinkling lights would look strung across the old tree branches, and stood in the dark to watch the warm glow fall over each other's faces, knowing this was the place, this humble backyard, not some gilded ballroom where they wanted to say their vows. Elena didn't deny she'd felt a pang of hurt once, when she heard her mother boasting about Victoria's wedding, when she caught the veiled suggestions that she should do something memorable instead of settling for less. Her heart had ached. But then Marcus placed his hand on her back, his gaze as steady as his shoulders, and she understood a wedding isn't a stage. It's not a place for her mother to stand tall and show off, not a postcard to send to distant relatives. A wedding is a place where two people promise each other that no matter how the world turns away, they will always be home to one another. She chose a simple cream dress with a small pocket sewn neatly at the waist, a detail she loved because it held the quiet freedom she cherished. Claire, her best friend, had helped her with every stitch, every seam like a silent blessing. They had giggled, trying out hairstyles, carefully picking out each little clip for her soft hair. There was no designer fussing, no complaints about not enough elegance. Just two women laughing in a small room, creating a version of the bride that was purely Elena, not someone else's idea of perfection. When Elena handed Marcus the first invitation she had finished, he held it like he was holding the whole world. "It's perfect," he said, and in his eyes shone a steadfast belief that nothing could shake. In that moment, Elena realized that what made their wedding special wasn't luxury or applause. It was in the hands that had painted the fence together, in the laughter that rang out when the rain unexpectedly drenched them, but they still held on tight. Her mother would never understand, and perhaps she didn't need to, because Elena knew that one day when they told their children and grandchildren about their wedding, they wouldn't mention who didn't come. They would say they chose each other, they chose love, and they lived a day that was completely beautifully their own. That morning, the soft gray sky over Boston seemed to offer a quiet, knowing greeting. Elena opened the door leading out to the garden, letting the cool breeze drift through her hair, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and newly bloomed wild flowers. She walked barefoot across the wooden deck, feeling each cool plank beneath her feet, each tiny crack a story of the old house itself. Rows of wooden chairs were set neatly along the aisle, lined with dried flower petals, each chair tied with a hand-dyed ribbon, rustic, yet imbued with reverence. Elena paused by the jars of glass lanterns hanging from the tree branches, the tiny bulbs inside still sleeping after a long night of waiting. She touched them lightly, as if touching the dreams she had patiently gathered day by day. Inside the small house, Claire was carefully pressing the cream-colored wedding dress with its softly cinched waist, her hands moving with practiced ease, her eyes sparkling with a happiness that was infectious. In the corner of the kitchen, Marcus was arranging simple glass cups on the long table, his smile gentle as he watched Elena enter his gaze, following her every small movement, as though each was the most sacred ritual of this momentous day. There were no bridesmaids or professional makeup artists, just a large mirror standing in the middle of the living room. Elena brushed her own hair, stripping away anything elaborate or excessive. She tucked two pure white gardenias behind her ear, letting the loose curls fall naturally over her shoulders. When her eyes met Claire's in the mirror, they didn't speak, just shared a smile of quiet understanding and trust. Marcus stood outside on the porch, wearing a neat navy suit that still carried the carefree spirit that was so wholly him. When he saw her, he paused for a moment, his tender smile like a silent song making her heart pound so loudly it felt like every other sound of the morning had disappeared. There was no background music or church bells, just the whisper of leaves and a sacred silence enveloping them. Elena walked slowly along the stone path, her soft dress swaying gently with each step. Her eyes never left Marcus, and his never left hers, a private space where no one else could intrude, no judgment could pierce through. They stood before each other in the small garden they had made with their own hands, and in that moment everything that had come before, the doubts, the disappointments, even the ache that her mother was not there, became distant clouds. Marcus took her hands in his hands, trembling not from nerves, but from a profound gratitude for this moment. "You make me feel like I came home," he whispered, his voice a prayer. Elena laughed softly through her tears, a smile she didn't bother to hide. There were no elaborate vows, no perfect script, only the promises etched in their hearts. And when their lips met, it wasn't the conclusion of a ceremony, but the beginning of a true home, built not from bricks and mortar, but from gentle gazes and the promise that from this day forward there would always be someone waiting at the end of the path. As the applause from the guests slowly faded into the quiet air of the garden, Elena and Marcus walked hand in hand to the long, old wooden table they had borrowed from the neighbors. The tabletop was covered with a simple white linen cloth, dried herbs woven together with glass jars brimming with wildflowers, and green leaves bringing the scent of a humble yet warm country feast. There were no waitstaff in pressed suits, no fine porcelain plates arranged in formal European style, just large cast-iron pots simmering with the sweet aroma of slow-cooked tomato sauce, roasted garlic, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. Elena and Marcus sat among close friends, among people who asked for nothing more than a seat and a story to share. They passed bowls of rich pasta, laughing heartily when someone reached too far for another piece of bread and accidentally dropped a tiny meatball, or when the old sound system played a slightly warped Van Morrison song that still sounded tender. There were no orchestrators, no long speeches. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken in glances and smiles. Elena lifted her thin glass of wine, her eyes sweeping across the long table. Here no one was an audience. Everyone was part of this moment. As night fell, the tiny lights Elena had strung on lengths of rope flickered to life, casting a golden glow like hundreds of fireflies dancing around the old trees. Marcus leaned close to her ear, his voice mingling with the breeze. "It's beautiful." Elena turned to him, her eyes alight with pride and gratitude, not because it was a perfect party or because of any praise, but because this was the vision they had once scribbled out together on scraps of paper in a little cafe, a simple celebration where everything was real. Claire sat across from her, her face glowing in the light, raising her glass and laughing. "This looks like a film set." Elena laughed softly, shaking her head. "No, it looks like home." And that was the truth. This place, with its hearty laughter, the smell of food cooked with love, and the glinting eyes of those who truly knew what she had survived wasn't a stage. It was the home she and Marcus had built with their own hands, with every drop of sweat and every tear. As the night deepened, the old music continued to play, mingling with the clink of spoons against bowls and endless laughter. Marcus brushed a stray lock of hair from Elena's cheek, and she rested her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes to etch this moment into her memory. In the glass jars hanging from the branches, candles flickered like tiny star dances, a private waltz, just for them. Elena knew that her mother would never understand, would never even think to ask, "Are you happy?" But that no longer mattered, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting for that answer. She had already found it in Marcus's hands, in Claire's laughter, in the taste of hot pasta passed around without hesitation. And Elena understood that when people truly love each other, they never ask if the wedding was dazzling or if there was enough room for every guest. They simply look into her eyes and know that she had found what she needed most, a quiet evening, no grandeur, but enough to make her sure that she would never be alone again. 2 weeks after that garden wedding night, Elena received the first message from Devin, the friend who had quietly recorded every moment with an old camcorder. It wasn't a polished wedding film like the shimmering videos her mother always admired. It was just a 90-second clip, no voiceover, no soaring drone shots, but simple, honest images. Marcus adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. Elena pouring water for Claire in the kitchen, their eyes meeting through the misty window pane and their bare feet dancing beneath the string lights hanging from the old apple tree. Elena sat alone in the living room, the lights off the screen glowing with each scene. The first time she watched it, she cried. The second time, she quietly wiped away her tears. The third time, when Marcus walked in, she reached out to pull him down beside her so they could watch that wordless video together, as if looking straight into their own hearts. Devin hadn't turned their wedding into a fairy tale. She had simply captured what had truly happened, hands woven together under the soft lights. Silent smiles shared across the chords of an old song. Marcus placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, looked at her, and whispered, "She made it feel like something ancient." Elena nodded, replying softly, "Do you think it's petty if I post it?" Marcus smiled, his gaze warm and steady. "Sometimes petty is just the truth," finally told. Elena didn't hesitate. She uploaded the clip to her social media account, writing only 3 words: October 8th. Home. No hashtags, no elaborate captions. She set the phone down and sat in the quiet darkness, letting everything flow past like a gentle stream. But the next morning, messages began to pour in unstoppable. That small clip had gone beyond the boundaries of a private memory. Strangers began to send messages of praise, sharing their own stories, people who had also chosen a wedding not to show off, but to belong to themselves. By midday, an indie design magazine reached out with a request. "Can we feature it?" Elena blinked, disbelieving. She hadn't sought fame, hadn't wanted to prove anything to her mother or to the curious gazes of distant relatives. But that clip, it was undeniable proof of a happiness she had built with her own hands. And just like that, Elena felt truly seen, not for the glamorous dresses or the expensive parties, but for the sincerity in every breath. Marcus held her in the kitchen, his warm breath brushing her ear. "I didn't think people would care." Elena confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus only smiled, his eyes as unwavering as that garden night. "They don't care about the setting, Elena. They care about the story." And she knew he was right. No one looked at those lanterns and wondered where they were bought. They saw only 2 people who chose to love each other before choosing a wedding, who chose laughter and truth over approving glances. And for the first time, Elena no longer felt she needed to hide her simplicity. She understood these fragmented clips, these genuine glances were the most precious treasure of her life. When the applause of the guests faded into the quiet night of the garden, Elena and Marcus held hands as they walked toward the long wooden table they had borrowed from a neighbor. The table was covered with a white linen cloth, and sprigs of dried herbs intertwined with glass jars full of wildflowers, and greenery bringing the feel of a rustic country feast, simple but warm. There were no servers in tidy suits, no expensive china plates arranged in European style, just large cast iron pots bubbling with the sweet aroma of simmered tomato sauce, roasted garlic, and freshly baked bread still steaming from the oven. Elena and Marcus sat among close friends, among people who wanted nothing but a seat and a story to share. They passed around bowls of rich pasta, laughing when someone reached for another piece of bread only to drop a small meatball onto the table, or when the old stereo played a Van Morrison song. A little warped, but still sweet. There was no master of ceremonies, no long speeches. Everything that needed to be said was already spoken in the glances and the smiles. Elena raised her thin glass of wine, her eyes moving across the length of the table. No one there was an observer. Everyone was part of the moment. As night fell, the tiny lights that Elena had strung by hand lit up, casting a warm golden glow like hundreds of fireflies dancing around the old branches. Marcus leaned in close to her ear and whispered, his voice mingling with the wind's hush. "It's beautiful." Elena turned to him, her eyes bright with pride and gratitude. It wasn't because the evening was perfect or because of the praise, but because it was the very picture they had imagined when they once doodled plans on a scrap of paper in a small coffee shop, a simple party where everything was real. Claire sat across from her face radiant in the lamplight, raising her glass and laughing. "This looks like a film set." Elena smiled and shook her head. "No, it looks like home." And it was true. This place, with laughter echoing the aroma of food cooked with love, the gleaming eyes of people who knew what she had been through, wasn't a stage. It was the home she and Marcus had built with their own hands, every drop of sweat and tear making it theirs. As the night deepened, the old music still played, blending with the clink of spoons against bowls and endless laughter. Marcus brushed a loose strand of hair from Elena's cheek, and she leaned into his shoulder, closing her eyes to seal this moment into memory. In the glass jars hanging from the branches, the candles flickered like the dance of tiny stars, a dance meant for them alone. Elena knew her mother would never understand, would never ask, "Are you happy?" But it didn't matter anymore, because for the first time in her life she didn't wait for an answer. She had found her own answer in Marcus's hands, in Claire's laughter, in the taste of hot pasta passed around without hesitation. And Elena understood that when people truly love each other, they never ask if the wedding was glamorous or if there was enough room for every guest. They just look into her eyes and know that Elena had found what she needed most, a gentle evening without grandeur, but enough to tell her she would never be alone again. Elena stood alone in the darkened screening room, lightly touching the fading glow of the film's final frame, as if it still held a lingering warmth on her fingertips. There were no apologies from her mother, no explanations, no sign of regret. But there was also no longer any torment or yearning in Elena's heart. When her mother stepped past the threshold of that room, Elena was no longer waiting for anything. Not for a late-blooming understanding, not for an "I'm sorry" that had long since become too late to mend old wounds. She simply stood there, her shoulders straight, and her gaze calm, as if offering a final silent farewell to the mother who had chosen not to stand with her on the most important day of her life. The days that followed drifted by like gentle winds. Elena no longer received messages or calls from her mother, no longer sat through the hollow holiday conversations at the dinner table. No one said they were cutting ties, but the silence between them said everything, a distance that no longer needed to be bridged. Strangely, Elena didn't feel left behind. She lost herself in the golden autumn afternoons of the little garden where the wedding had taken place, where she and Marcus still sat under the glow of lanterns each evening, fingers, interlaced eyes, speaking only to each other. Devon sent them the full wedding film, and a week later it was chosen to be shown at a small art exhibit in Seattle called Intimate Architecture. When Elena and Marcus walked into the gallery, they saw strangers standing in front of the screen, eyes glistening, hands clutching each other's. They didn't know Elena's name or her story, but they felt something profound, a love that didn't need anyone else's approval, only the beating hearts of the two who shared it. As night fell, Elena returned to the small house, watching Marcus move around the kitchen preparing dinner. He looked up at her, his gentle eyes like that first night they'd strung up the lanterns. "You okay?" he asked, his voice warm. Elena nodded, smiling without any lingering doubt. "I'm more than okay," she said, and in that moment she knew she had moved past all the pain, all the thoughtless words, all the judging eyes. She had found a true family, not because they shared her blood, but because they knew how to love and give without condition. Elena no longer looked at the glossy wedding photos online with envy or self-doubt. She no longer needed to prove to anyone whether her wedding was beautiful enough. She knew that in her own photos, where Marcus held her close, where Claire laughed out loud, where the golden lanterns glowed like stars, everything was enough. When someone asked about her wedding, she wouldn't talk about the guest list or the cake or the bouquet. She would tell them how she and Marcus had replanted wildflowers beneath the old apple tree, how they had held hands through sleepless nights, and how they had found each other in a gaze no one else could interrupt. And when Elena closed her eyes in those quiet autumn nights, she could hear her own heartbeat, steady, unshaken by doubt. Happiness, she now knew, was not something others could give or take away. It was something she had chosen and held on to. In every smile from Marcus, in every step through the lantern-lit garden, in every breath she took that no longer sought anyone's permission. In the end, when the lights had dimmed and the laughter had faded into the night, Elena remained, standing in the lantern-lit garden, wrapped in Marcus's arms, knowing that she was no longer the woman who needed anyone else's validation. She had chosen her own life, and that choice had turned everything into an eternal moment. If you've ever felt like you had to prove your happiness to the world, remember, sometimes all you need to do is smile quietly, walk forward, and let your own light shine. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this story, because somewhere out there, someone might be waiting to find the courage to say to themselves, "I am enough." Thank you for sharing this story with us today.